I'm going to tell you what I do from morning until waking and even what I do while I sleep in order to optimize my sleep. So let's start with getting up in the morning. Now, for me, I tend to wake up sometime around 6 a.m., 6:30, sometimes as late as 7 a.m. I don't typically sleep much later than 7 a.m. The first thing I do after I wake up is I take the pen that's on my nightstand and the pad of paper on my nightstand, and I write down the time in which I woke up. I do sleep with my phone in my room. I realize this is considered a sin and has certain hazards associated with it, but I put my phone on airplane mode about an hour before I go to sleep, and then I set my alarm typically for 6:30 a.m., and some days the alarm wakes me up. Other days I wake up before the alarm, and yes, some days the alarm goes off and I hit snooze a few times, and then usually by 7 a.m. I am up and out of bed. The reason for writing down what time I wake up is because I want to know that average wake-up time. That average wake-up time informs what's called my temperature minimum. It tells me when my body temperature was lowest. Temperature minimum is the time in each 24-hour cycle that your body temperature is lowest. I don't sleep with a thermometer in my mouth or elsewhere, and I don't think you should either. Instead, I know that the lowest temperature that my body will be at across the 24-hour cycle tends to be 2 hours before my typical wake-up time. And I want to know that number. It's called our temperature minimum. So if you're somebody that typically wakes up at 8 a.m., then your temperature minimum is sometime around 6 a.m. Remember, the temperature minimum is a time in the 24-hour cycle. I don't care what my actual temperature is. I care when my lowest temperature is. And I know that lowest temperature is approximately 2 hours before my average wake-up time. So I highly recommend that you write down when you wake up or track that in some way that works for you and use that as a reference point to determine your temperature minimum. We will return to the temperature minimum and how you can leverage the temperature minimum for several things. Shifting your clock, shifting your circadian sleep schedule and wake schedule. Also for shifting your eating schedule, etc. We will return to that. But even if you don't travel, even if you don't care about things like jet lag, even if you sleep fabulously all year round, never have a poor night's sleep, knowing your temperature minimum, that time when your temperature is at its lowest point, is a valuable thing to know. The second thing I do after I wake up is to get into forward ambulation, which is just nerd speak for taking a walk. Now, I have a dog, and as many of you know, he's a bulldog, and he doesn't really like to walk, especially not in the morning. But for humans and for animals, there's a phenomenon whereby when we generate our own forward motion, forward ambulation, visual images pass by us on our eyes, so-called optic flow. And for those of you that are low vision or no vision, the same phenomenon occurs in the auditory system. Sounds pass by us in so-called auditory flow. Getting into a mode of forward ambulation and especially experiencing visual flow has a powerful effect on the nervous system. The effect it has is essentially to quiet or reduce the amount of neural activity in this brain structure called the amygdala. Amygdala means almond, and many of you have probably heard about the amygdala for its role in anxiety and fear and threat detection. And indeed, the amygdala is part of the network in the brain that generates feelings of fear and threat and anxiety. It does a bunch of other things too, but that's one of its primary functions. There are now at least half a dozen quality papers published in quality peer-reviewed journals that show that forward ambulation, walking or biking or running, and generating optic flow in particular, has this incredible property of lowering activity in the amygdala and thereby reducing levels of anxiety. There are two papers that I'd like to highlight in particular that relate to this phenomenon. The first one was published in the journal Neuron, and the title of this paper is Whole Brain Functional Ultrasound Imaging. That just means they have a cool technique to evaluate the activity of structures in the brain across the entire brain, reveals brain modules for visual motor integration. What they found in this study, and I should mention the first author is Masse. This comes from Botan Roska's group. This was work done in mice, but I will talk about other species in a moment. What they found was essentially that when these mice walk forward and their eyes move from side to side, which is a natural consequence of moving forward, so-called optic flow is flowing past their eyes, many brain areas are activated, increase in their level of firing, but the amygdala in particular reduced its levels of firing. That's a very interesting finding, but it is in mice. However, these eye movements, these lateral eye movements from side to side, reduce activity levels in this fear/threat/anxiety center in the brain, the amygdala. Now, those are eye movements. They didn't specifically look at forward ambulation. Forward ambulation, walking forward, generates the sorts of eye movements that cause optic flow and reductions in amygdala activation. So for me, this process of taking a walk each morning isn't about exercise. It's not about burning calories. It's not about any of that. It's really about getting into optic flow and reducing the levels of amygdala activation. Now, I don't have anxiety. At least I don't have chronic anxiety or generalized anxiety. I tend to have a lot of energy, but at these points in the morning, I'm not very energetic. Sometimes I'm sort of shuffling more than I'm walking, in fact, and Costello is almost always shuffling, and I'm almost always trying to drag him first thing in the morning. But that walk is a particularly important protocol each day because it really serves to push my neurology in the direction that I'd like it to go, which is alert but not anxious. And it's kind of a fine line sometimes, especially as events surface throughout the day, emails come in, text messages come in, get bombarded with a number of things. I want to be alert and responsive. I want to be able to focus, but I don't want to feel anxious or reactive to these things. So the forward ambulation and this optic flow is the way that I ensure, based on quality peer-reviewed data, that my amygdala activation is slightly suppressed. Now, at the same time, I also want the alertness. I want alert and focused. I don't just want to be sleepy or super relaxed. I want to have a high degree of focus and alertness because I'm soon going to move into a bout of work. I need to lean into the day. So in order to do that, I make sure that the walking is done outdoors. That might be sort of a duh, but many people get up and start moving around their house, their apartment, and they don't go anywhere. And just walking around inside, it will generate some optic flow, but nothing like the sort of optic flow that you can generate in larger environments, like out-of-doors environments. If you can't get outdoors, doing it indoors is perfectly fine, but it's not going to have the same magnitude of positive effect. Now, in order to get the alertness, I do it outdoors because I also want sunlight in my eyes. Getting sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning is absolutely vital to mental and physical health. It is perhaps the most important thing that any and all of us can and should do in order to promote metabolic well-being, promote positive functioning of your hormone system, get your mental health steering in the right direction. There are a number of reasons for this, but before I get into those reasons, let me just emphasize what the protocol is. The protocol is get outdoors, ideally with no sunglasses if you can do that safely, even if there's cloud cover. More photons, light information, are coming through that cloud cover than would be coming from a very bright indoor bulb. So getting outdoors is absolutely key. How long should you do this? It's going to depend on the brightness of the environment. It's going to depend on a number of different factors. 2 minutes would be a minimum. 10 minutes would be even better. And if you can, 30 minutes would be fantastic. Now, if it's a very bright day or, you live in a place where there's bright sunlight, clear day on a snowfield, you would only need something like 60 seconds. But most people aren't living in those sorts of conditions. So getting outside for a 10-minute walk or a 15-minute walk will basically ensure that you're getting adequate stimulation of these neurons in the eye that are called the melanopsin intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells. I know that's a mouthful. These are neurons that don't care about shapes of objects or the motion of objects. These are neurons that convey to the brain that it's daytime and it's time to be alert. And it sets in motion a huge number of biological cascades within every cell and organ of your body, from your liver to your gut to your heart to your brain. It really sets things down the right path. Early in the day, we experience a natural and healthy bump in a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol comes from the amygdala. That cortisol, as I mentioned, is healthy and normal and promotes wakefulness. It actually promotes a healthy immune system. So I know you've heard that stress and cortisol disrupt the immune system, but not the short little pulse of cortisol that you get each morning. It's very important that that pulse of cortisol arrive early in the day. I want to emphasize this again. It's very important that that pulse of cortisol arrive early in the day. And that pulse of cortisol is going to happen once every 24 hours, no matter what. It's going to happen, and you get to time it. How do you time it? Primarily by when you view bright sunlight or bright light of another kind, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So you want that cortisol pushed early. If you wake up before the sun comes out, it's fine to turn on artificial lights, but then you would want to get outside as soon as you can to get this natural light stimulation of your eyes. And it does have to be to your eyes. Just to really drill down into the details for a moment, you don't want to stare directly at the sun or any light that's so bright that it feels painful. If you feel like you have to close your eyes or blink, please do. You don't want to damage your retinas. The point here is to get the sunlight indirectly. It's going to essentially be scattered everywhere through the cloud cover, But you know from looking at a flashlight directly into that flashlight versus looking at the beam that flashlight generates on the ground, that if you're standing in the shade, you're going to get less of that sunlight than you are if you're out in an open field. So this is why the time outside, it's going to need to vary depending on your particular environment. But do your best to do this every day. If you miss a day, no big deal, but try not to miss more than one day. Otherwise, your mental and physical health will start to suffer. And doing this each day costs nothing. It's just time. You can combine it with the forward ambulation, with the walk and the optic flow that I talked about before. And that's what I do each morning to generate a sense of alertness in my body and brain, to generate a sense of calm, yet alert. And that's also what I do with Costello, with my bulldog. People have asked me, do these same mechanisms apply to animals? Well, the reality is many of these mechanisms were actually discovered in animals and then were tested in humans and verified that they also exist in humans. Not always. Sometimes it was the reverse, where they were tested first in humans and then brought to animals. But indeed, your dog, your horse, I don't know what other animals are out there, they need this. Now, if you have a hamster or a nocturnal animal, the reason why they like to run on their wheels at night is because they're nocturnal. They don't like being in the light. Light actually causes them to freeze, right? Actually, if you are into aquaria, you like fish, they always say, don't overfeed your fish. You'll kill the fish. That's true. But guess what? The fastest way to kill a fish is to keep the lights on 24 hours a day. They also need circadian rhythms, these 24-hour rhythms. So we'll do an entire month at some point about pet health. But meanwhile, get that morning sunlight. So now we have a first protocol, which is to write down the time of day that you wake up. The second protocol is to take a walk first thing in the morning. And the third protocol is woven in with that walk, at least for me, which is to get that sunlight exposure. Now, if you can't get sunlight exposure, you absolutely can't. I don't necessarily recommend buying one of these dawn alarm lights. And I'm sorry to say this, but they're just vastly overpriced relative to what they are. They're basically a bright LED. I have a pad that's a 930 lux light pad. I think it was designed for drawing. Those are available at a fraction of the cost that a morning light simulator would provide, and yet it's really bright enough, at least for me. I tend to put it on my desk while I work each morning. So here's a principle that you can leverage. If you want to be alert, view bright lights and make those lights above you. Or in front of you. If you want to go to sleep soon, or you don't want to be awake for whatever reason, try and eliminate your exposure to light. And this is not about exposure of the skin to light. This is about exposure of your eyes, of your neural retinas to light. For those of you that are concerned about blue light, I want to emphasize that blue light is precisely the wavelength of light that is optimal for stimulating these neurons in your eye, which set your circadian rhythms properly. Don't want to shield yourself from blue light early in the day or throughout the day or anytime you want to be awake. In fact, that could have a number of detrimental consequences. Fortunately, all those consequences are going to be reversible after a short period of time of making sure that you don't wear your blue blockers during the day. Please. The time to wear blue blockers, if you do, is at night and in the evening when you're headed towards sleep. Some people get headaches while they work on the computer all day or staring at screens, and so they get blue blockers thinking that's going to protect them from their headaches. However, any protection that you get from headaches from blue blockers is going to be minimal in comparison to what's really going on there, which is that people are viewing devices and screens up close for too many hours throughout the 24-hour cycle. A better remedy would be to step away from that computer from time to time and to make sure that you can look far off into the distance, ideally a distance longer than 20 feet, like view a horizon, go out on a balcony, things of that sort, take a walk around, get into optic flow. So if you're into blue blockers, make sure you're only wearing them in the late evening and at night. I personally don't wear blue blockers at all. I prefer to just control my light viewing behavior by doing this. I do the other form of circadian control, which is to dim the lights. And I do that because dimming the lights and setting them lower in the environment sets up the brain and body for sleep much better than simply just wearing some blue blockers, And please know, if you do wear blue blockers, that if the light in your environment is bright enough, it doesn't matter if you're blocking out the blues. These cells in the eye will respond to other wavelengths of light. So I have no vendetta against the blue blockers. And, I fully expect the blue blockinistas to come after me with, blue blockers. But as you do that, please understand that the biology points in the direction of get a lot of bright light throughout the day, including blue light, and at night, just limit the total amount of overall light that you're exposed to, including from screens. So then Costello and I get back from our walk. Sometimes that walk was 10 minutes. Sometimes it was 60 minutes, depending on how slowly Costello is walking that day. Indeed, many mornings, I'm the guy carrying his bulldog back up the hill. My neighbors know me so well, they know Costello so well that they've since stopped pulling over and asking if the dog is okay. Sometimes they'll ask if I'm okay. Nonetheless, we get back. I give him his food. I give him his water. And I give me my water. I'm a big believer, based on quality peer-reviewed data, that hydration is essential for mental performance. Now, I confess I don't really like drinking big glasses or big jugs of water first thing in the morning. I don't know why, but my thirst doesn't